there's one bill, the Homeland Security Appropriations bill, that is still being debated over the wall funding, and that could simply be kicked into the new year, into February. This is so easily averted. The party that makes the policy demand owns the shutdown. And so I think on the Republican side, I mean, this is just a fight they cannot win, and they know it. Nancy Pelosi has no incentive to negotiate with Republicans between now and her swearing-in day on January the 3rd. Her position only gets stronger. So, I mean, I don't understand the point of this thing. It makes absolutely no sense.
As we look at this, the president, we know, when I believe it was December 11th, the Oval Office meeting with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. Listen, Democrats got one thing they wanted out of that meeting for sure. They got the president to say on camera, right, yeah, I will own this shutdown. The president, of course, now is not owning this shutdown, Joe, which probably could have been predicted as well. He's calling it the Democrats' shutdown. You know, as we just heard from Congressman Dent, there is no real incentive for Democrats either to give in here. But could there be a win in here for them if they did try to advance this in a different way moving in? Not do what everybody's expecting from them, but come January 3rd, extend even perhaps a little bit more of an olive branch.
Yeah, well, I don't know that an olive branch, it's certainly not warranted here, but if politically, if they could show a bipartisanship, you can't negotiate with someone who thinks he's winning. And Trump thinks he's winning this fight. And in a sense, he is winning this fight because he only cares about his base. And as Jess properly pointed out, the deal collapsed because Ann Coulter and Sean Hannity didn't like it. As crazy as that sounds, it's true. So my view is I think the Democrats need to find something else that they want to help Trump save face. We talked a little bit last week about, I think, the biggest concern for Democrats, which is Trump will shut down the Mueller investigation by firing Mueller. They could certainly go to Trump now and say, in return for some border wall money, let's pass the bill that Senator Coons has been pushing that will protect Mueller and make sure it doesn't happen. I'm very concerned that he is going to fire Mueller.
The president would really get behind something like that?
If he could say, I got my border wall money, I could talk to his base, yes, I think he might. But we do need some new idea because right now there are no incentives to either side because both sides think they're winning this. Democrats are actually winning it. Trump just thinks he's winning it.
Right. And you know, to Joe's point, while that may sound like a modest proposal, on New Day last week, Mark Short said he would advise the president to take that deal, which is sort of interesting. But just let's talk about a deal because I think it's generally acknowledged, and Charlie Dent just said that Democrats have far more leverage here. Republicans don't. So what kind of a deal would you advise your fellow Democrats to take, either before the new year or after January 3rd when they come into power in the House?
I want to make sure that it stands on the principles that they are currently talking about. Saying that the wall is immoral is important. It is not just that it is bad, expensive policy that we were never supposed to have to pay for. It's actually wrong. So if we come in being able to say, this is what we stand for, we want to do right by the American people, there are so many investments that we need to be making in our country that we are simply not able to do right now because Republicans have hamstrung the entire government towards the agenda of one guy who doesn't know what he wants and doesn't know how to get it even if he did. So I just want to make sure that they're coming in from that point of view, knowing that they're in the right, knowing that they won decisively in November. If America actually wanted this border wall, we would have seen a different outcome in November. Republicans were not shy about calling for that as their chief agenda item.
But so are you therefore saying that the 1.3 or 1.6 being offered by Democrats currently, that you would not counsel your fellow progressives to support that?
I mean, since that's where they decided they needed to be when they offered the first resolution, that makes sense to me. I would certainly hope that that money goes towards things that actually secure the border. We know that we need more technology down there. We know we need more resources down there. What we don't need is a gigantic wall. And I think most rational thinking adults in Washington are aware of that as well.
So, Congressman, what we've heard, too, from Mick Mulvaney just over the weekend, saying that the president is open to other immigration discussions, is open to other immigration solutions. But as you point out, isolating the rest of the Republican Party for the Freedom Caucus over the weekend, what are the chances that there is actually, do you think, a discussion about other ideas, other immigration solutions that is happening right now at the White House?
My guess right now is there's probably zero discussion about a deal between now and January the 3rd. What I do think, though, after January 3rd, when the Democrats take over the House, then I think you'll get into some serious negotiating. And here's what they should negotiate. If I were the Democrats, I'd say, okay, you want some border security funding, Mr. President, I'd say, okay, well, we want the Dreamers. And we had a deal, and there was a deal before, a bipartisan deal, and the president kind of undermined that one. But I would put that back on the table. Joe just mentioned maybe the Mueller protection bill, which I had introduced in the House, actually, with Pete Welsh. And so, yeah, they could put those things on the table and see how much they can get. But I think, a few $1 billion for, border security is a small price to pay for Dreamers and maybe the Mueller protection bill. So I would, if I were the Democrats, I'd start negotiating probably after the new year.
So bringing that back, we should say, because as we pointed out, that has been on the table.
Yeah, bring it back, yes.
So
yes, correct. Yeah, restoring that, because that was always correct.
And that's always been a priority for Democrats. Joe, you are the veteran of some serious shutdown fights that had massive ramifications, but you're saying basically that right now both sides are dug in because they both think they're winning.
Yes.
And yet the government is shut down, and it looks like it's going to go through the new year. And so there's a question of, if folks think they're winning, then they're assuming no one's getting hurt. And I want to read you a quote by Congressman Scott Perry, Republican of Pennsylvania. Quote, "Who's living like they're not going to make the next paycheck?" He's saying that, hey, it's no big deal. Even if you work for the government, you don't need that money. I'm guessing that some of Mr. Perry's constituents may feel differently. But if that's the attitude in Washington, where's the urgency?
Well, I think the urgency is when the one side realizes they're not winning. And that's how these things play out. Both sides go in with their talking points. They think they're right. And then over time, sometimes it takes 24 hours. Sometimes it takes 3 weeks. It took Newt Gingrich 3 weeks to figure out in 1995 that, boy, I'm losing. I need to get out of here. My speakership is in jeopardy here. And it's a callous way of discussing it as both sides think they're winning, but politically that's the dynamic. But you're exactly right.
Everybody hated Comey. They thought he did a horrible job. The Democrats hated him. Literally the day before I fired him, they were saying he should be fired. As soon as I fired him, they said, oh, what did you fire him for? That was a terrible thing to do. It's a disgrace what's happening in our country. But other than that, I wish everybody a very Merry Christmas.
Very Merry Christmas indeed. We start with the president entrenched in his White House foxhole. His Christmas wishes coupled with Christmas complaints. The president's border wall is still the sticking point in a shutdown standoff now on its fourth day. This morning, the president had no answers for federal employees worried about their next paycheck.
I can't tell you when the government's going to be open. I can tell you it's not going to be open until we have a wall, a fence, whatever they'd like to call it. I'll call it whatever they want. But it's all the same thing. It's a barrier from people pouring into our company, into our country.
The president says he won't budge on the border wall, but in his remarks, there are signals his demands are again moving. In another phone call with troops, with another extended rant, the president put his inner monologue on public display. The optics of the Oval Office session hint at the president's mindset. He's increasingly alone and increasingly under siege. His life, political, professional, and personal, all under investigation. He's about to lose control of the House. And asked this morning about what happens when Democrats assume power, the president repeated a familiar line.
Well, then it's probably presidential harassment, and we know how to handle that. I think I handle that better than anybody. And there's been no collusion. After 2 years, no collusion. There has been collusion, but it's been by the Democrats.
CNN's Abby Phillip is live at the White House. And Abby, the president says he wants a wall, but is creating some wiggle room on what exactly the wall is and how much he needs. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Monty, what we saw this morning from the president was shifting demands and shifting claims about the status of the situation on the border. First, he said you can call it whatever you want, a fence, perhaps steel slats. Then he said he wants 500 miles of wall, maybe 550. That's down from 900 miles of wall that about a year ago he said was necessary at the border. This is a president who is digging in his heels on the demand for funding for something that he can call to his supporters a border wall, but also is saying at the same time that wall is already being built at the southern border and that he simply wants to finish it before the next election. Now therein lies the underlying problem with this whole this whole issue is that President Trump wants this for his base, and Democrats are unwilling to give him that political victory. President Trump going even so far as to say that federal workers he's talked to have already said that they want him to keep the government closed until he gets his border wall funding. Now, President Trump is here in Washington for the fourth day after canceling plans to go to Florida, and his aides are already signaling that this will not end soon. Mick Mulvaney over the weekend made the point that federal workers' next paycheck that might be affected by this shutdown is not for another week or two. So I think we're getting into territory here where President Trump doesn't seem to be giving in much, but he clearly is signaling that he wants this political victory so he can go into his election campaign with a win. Manu.
Yeah, a shutdown that could last for some time. Abby Phil from the White House, thanks so much. And here with me in the studio to share their reporting and their insights, Alana Shore with the Associated Press, Jake Sherman with Politico, David Drucker with the Washington Examiner, and CNN's Sarah Murray. I want to start with what Abby was referring to about the president's remarks from this morning. One of the things that stuck out to me was he made it very clear this wall needs to be done before 2020. This is tied in his mind very clearly to the next election. I mean, I wonder how much you think that his base will punish him if he's not able to get funding for this wall, if he's not able to carry through with this promise.
Well, he clearly believes there will be consequences from his base. I mean, witness, the backlash among conservative pundits that drove him to this remarkable about-face that brought us to where we are today. And also his withdrawal from Syria, which he announced is another promise to his base. So clearly Trump is already in preparing for re-election mode.
Yeah, he is. And he also doesn't seem to be feeling much pressure from the roughly 800,000 workers or so who have been impacted by this, many of whom are furloughed, some of whom are working without paychecks. He was asked about these workers today, his concerns about them, or if he had any concerns about them. This was his message to them.
Well, I think they understand what's happening. They want border security. The people of this country want border security. It's not a question of me. I'd rather not be doing shutdowns. Many of those workers have said to me and communicated, stay out until you get the funding for the wall. These federal workers want the wall.
So in case you missed that, he said many of these workers have said to me and communicated, stay out until you get funding for the wall. I mean, this is a president that does not seem to be feeling any heat whatsoever to try to get a deal anytime soon.
Well, Treasury is shut down, so I'm not sure many Treasury employees are communicating their desire for a wall to him. But with each passing day, I think it's safe to say the president loses more leverage as Democrats get closer to holding a majority and Democrats get emboldened to block Trump. I mean, this is the president is entering what will be, we don't know if he understands this because he's not acting like it, but the most hostile period of his presidency so far. And this shutdown is going to stretch at least until the new year from what we see now, and possibly midway into January, as Democrats have literally zero incentive to give in after the president has kind of rejected a host of offers that they've put forward to them.
And I think what you guys have seen, I mean, shutdowns, they get worse the longer they go. So it's one thing to be in this sort of partial shutdown when, some people, it hasn't hit their paychecks yet. It could still be a couple weeks where people are on holiday, they're enjoying their sort of Christmas vacation, and so they're kind of tuned out to all of this as it is. But the longer it goes on, the worse it gets. The more you start seeing the stories of these consequences, the more you hear the stories of people who are expecting paychecks and aren't getting them, people who still have to show up and go to work without pay. And I think that's when the president begins to feel the pressure.
An 8-year-old Guatemalan boy has died while in U.S. Customs and Border Protection custody. He started showing signs of illness on Christmas Eve and died this morning in New Mexico. Joining me now is CNN's Jean Casares and attorney Raul Reyes. Jean, let's start with you. Tell us what you know about what happened.
Well, Dana, we're just getting this information in, and they have confirmed that he was an 8-year-old Guatemalan national who crossed with his father over into New Mexico. And shortly after that, when they were in the custody of the Customs and Border Patrol, an agent yesterday afternoon, Christmas Eve afternoon, noticed the little boy that something was wrong. So immediately he and his father were transported to the Gerald Champion Regional Medical Center in Alamogordo. They originally thought the little boy had a common cold, but then they were assessing him further and realized he had a fever. So they prescribed him with antibiotics and ibuprofen. He was released with his father, and then it was hours later, last night, Christmas Eve, that he started throwing up. So he was transported immediately back to the medical center and died shortly after midnight this morning on Christmas Day. Now, I'm sure you remember the beginning of December, a little girl, 7-year-old Joaquin Cual Maquin, who was actually from Guatemala also. Her father took her over into New Mexico. She began to vomit, and 48 hours after entering the United States, she died. Now, there is not an official cause on either one of these deaths, but the arm of the Professional Responsibility of Border Patrol is now conducting an investigation on what caused this little boy's death. A lot of similarities there. Both had made the 2,000-mile journey to come to this country. And more questions, I think, now than answers, but 2 children are now deceased.
It's just absolutely horrible. Thank you so much for that report. Breaking right now, an 8-year-old Guatemalan boy has died while in U.S. Customs and Border Protection custody. He started showing signs of illness on Christmas Eve and died this morning in New Mexico. Joining me now is CNN's Jean Casares and attorney Raul Reyes. Jean, let's start with you. Tell us what you know about what happened.
Well, Dana, we're just getting this information in, and they have confirmed that he was an 8-year-old Guatemalan national who crossed with his father over into New Mexico.